So, this talk is about how to make allies with web performance. It is not a technical talk, so this is more about the cultural aspects of developing relationships with other people who might be able to help you in your journey with web performance. My name's Ethan Gardner. I'm a full stack engineer at a software consultancy called Flexion. I've worked all across the stack in a variety of different industries. Currently, I'm in the public sector in the United States. And as I mentioned, this talk is about the people side of web performance optimization, how you can provide value by connecting performance to business metrics, and maybe overcoming some negative perceptions that people have about working with engineers or engineers in general. Before we do that, I'd like to take a quick detour. So assume you're in a demo with a software vendor, and you hear the software vendor say, "You're our largest client by far." Based on the people that are in that meeting, they might get different things out of that message. So, if you're in client relations, you might start thinking about issue resolution and customer service. If you're in marketing, you might think about features in the roadmap, maybe about getting some PR if they write about you in the form of a case study. And, well, engineers were typically seen as the people who come in and have a cynical view about the things that people are so excited about. So we're also perceived kind of as geeks and nerds, which, sometimes it doesn't help our message because that can have a negative connotation. Let's talk about a little bit about what we are missing in terms of engineers. So while I was getting my master's degree about 10 years ago, I did a literature review, and it was basically about the skills that engineers were missing as they entered the workforce. And this was interviews with business practitioners, managers, leaders, all kinds of stuff, saying that, the technical stuff is great. They're well prepared technically, but there are some soft skills, and these are the top 5 that were listed, ranked by number of mentions in that literature review. We'll talk about some of these. And you can see that since I've been in the field, I've been in the field for 20 years now. I've been doing web performance work heavily for 5. The tech stuff has changed a lot in that time, but really the people aspect hasn't really changed all that much. So, getting to communication, how you say things matters. I had a boss once who told me, "Don't say no, say not right now." And you can be abrasive with your communication, or you can be a little gentler in your delivery. And I've found that even though the gentle delivery is sometimes very challenging for myself, it really helps my message get heard a lot better. So you build and burn social capital with your interactions with people. If you just give an outright no, that might seem dismissive. Whereas if you say not right now, that could be a number of different reasons. You could have competing priorities, other things going on, but it doesn't outright dismiss the idea. I also had another boss tell me as I was working in an ad agency to think like a marketer. And this is a mistake, and I'm going to focus a lot on marketing during the rest of this presentation because I have had at times contentious relationships with marketers over the course of my career. I've made plenty of mistakes and I've learned a lot from them. So as a web performance pro, I'm always thinking about my user. I'm trying to think about how can I make things snappy, more reliable, more pleasant to use, thinking about delivery and those types of things. However, a mistake I made was to not frame that through the marketing lens. So once I took a step back and tried to take off those engineering blinders, I really started seeing a lot more success with getting buy-in for performance work from other people. So the question I ask myself in this case is, how can I frame what I'm going after to be relevant to marketing, but ultimately benefit my user in the end? Going with that communication, this is what I came up with. So I like to frame performance as a joint venture. So this definitely ticks that teamwork box. If you say marketing opens new doors, performance keeps them open. And I find this is true, right? Like you can get all kinds of traffic to a website. Marketing can drive tons of traffic there, but if it's hard to use, if it's hard to convert, if things aren't feeling uh, or give the user a sense of confidence that they want to enter their credit card in this website or what have you, that makes it very hard to complete that transaction. So, as I was doing research for this presentation, I came across this thread on Reddit. Now, the marketing subreddit isn't one that I visit regularly, but I think this is kind of illustrative of finding common ground with people in other job roles. So the quote was, if you can't measure it, you can't prove if it's working. And also, if you're spending money, you should be making money. Otherwise, everything's just a cost. So I think in terms of web performance, as well as other job roles, we typically all have some measure of an it that we are trying to measure. So it's a matter of making inroads and figuring out how our version of that it relates to theirs. So when working with other job roles, I tend to avoid talking about milliseconds. Mind you, if I'm talking to other people who do web performance, I mention milliseconds, I measure all the metrics and that type of stuff. But talking with other people who aren't engineers, milliseconds isn't really a familiar measurement of time. And this is kind of contradictory to what you might see in case studies, and it's up to us to really connect the dots. So if you look at the famous Deloitte study, Milliseconds Make Millions, as well as Nielsen's usability engineering book, they both mention 100 milliseconds is a significant amount of time for engineers, or 0.1 seconds. So um, in terms of framing that for other people, I like to try and help people connect the dots. One tried and true method in working with other folks, especially marketers, the tried and true technique is to mention that Core Web Vitals is used as Google's part of Google's search ranking factors. So you can frame this a different way. You can say that faster sites can improve our SEO without increasing the volume of content that we publish or the amount of dollars that we spend. And this really helps um, give benefit to someone in a different job role. Also, I like to have a conversation with people. So, getting with that teamwork, that communication, I ask a mix of get to know you questions. I ask a mix of job related questions, and these serve different purposes. So we can use the personal information or personal questions to establish common ground as grounds for analogies and future explanations. Maybe we have a common interest that we can bond over. Has nothing to do with waterfall charts or anything like that, but it's very, very helpful to be able to help people along with your explanations in order for those to make sense. So if you consider the marketer, they might be concerned with the products that either that they sell or that they compete with. Data collection, return on ad spending is a big one for them. So let's talk briefly about the product. This is something I did at my my former company. I assembled a list of competing sites, and what I did was I actually asked marketing to help. I said, I'm trying to explore web performance in terms of a competitive advantage that we might have, or developing a competitive advantage over sites that we compete with. Can I get a list from you that of our competitors for each one of our brands? And of course, they were happy to help. They thought it was great that someone was really advocating for them. So this does a lot to build that alliance that this whole talk is about. In terms of this product competition, I did make a report So what you're looking at on screen, this is the Web Performance Article Leaderboard. It's a site that I referenced while I was doing this project. And essentially it runs a number of different sites um, in the media sector through Lighthouse on a regular schedule, and it ranks them just to see how sites stack up. There's other tools for this, but the thing I like about this is it gives you numbers and rankings that's very easy to understand. Lighthouse has scores 0 to 100, so it's one number that people can easily digest. It's not information overload, even though I think in terms of web performance data, there are tools that I prefer over Lighthouse, but in terms of just getting people talking about it, Lighthouse by far and away seems to be the tool that most people who aren't in web performance recognize by name. So what I did with this was I got that list that I mentioned of the competitors. I generated a report. And once I generated that report, I shared that with my CEO. And I mentioned in that email to my CEO with the report attached, here's our competitors. Marketing helped me put this together. Marketing was CC'd on the email. So my CEO was very pleased that, we had people at our company who were working together in different job roles, as well as marketing was pleased because I painted them in a favorable light to the CEO. And, they sent me a bulleted list of stuff. It wasn't too much effort on their part, but I gave them the win as well. So this also got executive buy-in. The CEO said, what's the low-hanging fruit that we can do to actually start to make some ground on our competitors? Is there anything we can do quick, low effort? And that eventually became a performance practice. So I took web performance from something that was zero recognition at my previous company to something that was an official company goal within a span of 3 years. If you keep chipping away at it, people will eventually start to pay attention. So this is probably the most technical part of this presentation. I find that as you're doing web performance, initially it might be hard to secure a budget for your own tools. So there are options that you can build yourself. So if you schedule anything, anything that runs on a schedule, so in this case, I'm most familiar with AWS, using a CloudWatch event on a schedule, hitting the Crux API, recording that information, and then down here in this porting workflow, do the same thing. Send your report out on a schedule, fan out those notifications. And this is something I think is critical with web performance work is you have to hit people in their stream of work. So if people are used to working with Slack, if people are used to email, you have to send those notifications there because otherwise people are going to forget to check yet another tool, yet another dashboard, yet another report. So I would encourage you to do that. Getting back into the people side of things and the teamwork aspect. So what is marketing's current work versus their challenges? And are A and B aligned? So sometimes people might have an enormous challenge that they think is really important for their job, but they have other competing things that they need to be executing on. So for example, if their biggest challenge was, I'm just not getting too much out of my advertising dollars, I want to increase my ad spend. And you ask them, well, what are you working on currently? And they say, well, we have a new product launch. Those two might not necessarily be aligned. So I want to see if there's skills that I have in my engineering toolbox that can kind of help people along the way. Because if you solve other people's problems, they love that. So they will work with you in the future. Go shopping for ways and different case studies that have helped other people in the past. Maybe the relationship already with performance data and the business metrics. But if not, this is a great place to start, either on WPO stats or web.dev case studies. I reference these all the time. And getting into that return on ad spend. So let's work on an example here. So if we notice that return on ad spend might not be what we want it to be, so we can frame it like this. When users click a paid ad and then the landing page is slow, they bounce. We can correlate that. We can show bounce rate versus speed. And that means that you're spending advertising money for a visit that we didn't get anything out of. People didn't convert. They might have moved on with their lives. So when I was at my previous job, I did notice, here's the milliseconds statistic that I will share with all of you, that a 500 millisecond reduction in first contentful paint resulted in a 20% increase in user engagement. So the more engaged people were, the more likely they were to convert. And bottom line, marketing needs people looking at their site. If you connect that dot for them, here's how we get more out of that traffic. They think that's great. So this is something that I really learned in the last year. I'm anxious to implement this for other people in the field. So present a hypothesis. So we can say, for example, we believe that quicker rendering has an impact on on conversion rate. So if we take an action, in this case, improving first contentful paint on our landing page, we will see, here's our result: revenue increase and increased return on ad spend. So this is a hypothesis. We can validate this hypothesis. We have all kinds of measurements and metrics that we can use. And this is an article recently, and this kind of goes back to what we discussed in the last session about user journeys. Are there specific user journeys that people complete? Can we track that performance data over that user journey to make sure that it stays snappy the entire way? And also, what metrics are important for marketing, because that gives us extra information so we can kind of shape our narrative in that communication. Also, charts and graphs can tell a story. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a conversation with somebody who has influence inside of a company and hear them say, I'm a visual person. So if you look at like maybe some infographics that people share online, or you shop for any type of inspiration for graphs, we certainly use like histograms and waterfall charts and flame graphs, but there's so much more out there. So get creative with it. It's a great way to give people something they can easily parse as opposed to looking at raw data. Another thing that is helpful is to acknowledge people, validate things. So if you know that someone says, engineering, they're a bunch of nerds, like, and they say that in kind of a negative connotation, you can lean into that. You can validate their feelings, but you can also say, but I got the tools to help you. So maybe if you don't know if they think you're a nerd, maybe leave that first part out, but you can mention something about that user journey, how quickly people can act, how smooth the journey feels, and that speed can be a product differentiator. Marketing's always looking for that. So this, again, provides something of value. And this is just illustrative of how I would do something with INP to someone who's a non-engineer. Interpret that data. I mentioned this point earlier. So instead of mentioning that 370 to 160 milliseconds, you can say that users were tapping buttons. You can be illustrative with that and show a side by side. And you can say now they get a smoother, faster experience, because pretty much everybody has done the rage click, the rage tap on something, waiting for an interface to respond. That's very, very relatable to pretty much everybody who's had a device in their hands at some point. Okay, so the getting to know you questions, I mentioned this. Find opportunities for establishing common ground, let you understand the analogies. So, and also, I think asking if there's been friction working with engineering in the past helps you figure out how hard do I need to work to really establish this relationship. Um, Gives me a glimpse of the barriers I need to overcome, and it's all helpful information to knowing like maybe we can just hit the ground running. Maybe they haven't had friction with engineering. They think engineering's great and we can just like get right into it. But maybe there needs to be some more relationship building. This one's kind of sneaky. So, data collection. You can ask, um, hey, do you have all the data you need? And is there data you're collecting that you're not using? So, the reason I say it's sneaky is because I've been at companies in the past where if marketing doesn't have the data that they need, they might be shopping for ways to get that data. So they might be introducing a new third party tool, they might be approaching vendors. I want to keep tabs on that because I I want to insert myself in that conversation. So I want to advocate for the good third parties that provide that mix of business information and performance, and maybe disqualify others that maybe aren't something that I want on my site. So, and also, is there data they're collecting that they aren't using? Do I have, again, the skills or the ability to take that data they're not using and make something insightful, make something useful? And a technique I use for all of this is to just take the company Slack. In this case, it's the RAND's leadership Slack, but I've done this at companies. Sort your Slack channels by the newest created channel and see what people are spinning up, see what's top of mind, see what has that recency. And you might be surprised to see conversations or any type of evaluation of data or a third party in there. Getting to guidance, so the documentation part of those soft skills. I realize I can't be at every meeting. I can't be in attendance at everything, but documentation is really the way to scale your impact as an engineer. You can document what creates or constitutes a good third party versus a bad one. And this is, again, something I did at my previous company. I provided a script that people could just copy and paste in an email, fire that off to a vendor of questions to ask them that were important to me. And that gave me enough information to be able to make an assessment or to help guide that conversation, even if I wasn't in that meeting. So, very useful tool. Finally, eventually you will have disagreements with folks. I think working agreements are very important. So you can make this a collaborative exercise. It can be a team building thing between you and other people. So figure out, how do we handle disagreements? Like, can we run experiments? How long should we run them? Do we have any types of protocols of running the code only where it's needed? How do we define fast? Like, what is fast enough for us? And you can revisit this um, as often as you'd like, but it gives you a tool to be able to say, instead of it being an us versus them, it's a, hey, we agreed upon this. We have this team working agreement, um, and this is what we decided. So it becomes a more objective thing that way because it's a living document that you can point to and say, hey, remember this conversation. And that is all I have.